Missouri, 1980. We see a man driving with the top down on the freeway with his girlfriend. As they drive through the roads and make a stopover near a Dairy Queen, this man takes her to the woods and shows her a plant that he had planted himself years before. He tells her about how his plan is almost going to come into place, but she really doesn't understand it. All she knows is that she's in love with this spaceman. 34 years later, we see the product of that love, Peter Quill, together with the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy, Gamora, Drax, Rocket, and a little baby Groot. Tonight, they are on a mission to guard the Sovereign's priceless batteries that a monstrous beast was threatening to consume. After successfully slicing open the said monster, the group receive a warm congratulations from Ayesha, the High Priestess of the Sovereign. As a reward for their service, they receive their bounty, none other than Gamora's sister and rival, Nebula, who was actually caught stealing some battery. Speaking of, as they walk away from the job, Rocket reveals to Drax that he pocketed some of the batteries himself. Because of that, not long after they fly out of the planet, they are followed by a fleet of remotely powered Sovereign ships. With their ship being lasered by hundreds of ships and no nearby jump point, Rocket and Peter take turns in piloting the ship through a quantum asteroid belt that is extremely hard to get through. Unfortunately for these two knuckleheads, they just have to fight all the way through as they each steal control from each other, despite being in the middle of a pursuit. Gamora tries scolding them, but it's too late. Their ship gets damaged, and when they get out of the belt, they're once again surrounded by the Sovereign fleet. With guns firing in all directions, they realize they have nowhere to go until something strange happens. All of a sudden, all the ships are wiped away and destroyed. As they fly away to the nearest jump point, Rocket notices that in the distance, there's a white ship with a man on top of it, just waving at them. When they make a hard landing on a different planet, their ship is absolutely ruined. Gamora is rightfully pissed off and calls out both of the guys for caring more about their ego than the welfare of the entire crew. As they argue, they notice that in the distance, the man from earlier followed them to the jump point and is now there with them. Upon landing his odd white ship, the bearded man and a skinny mantis-like woman step out. After all these years, I've found you, the man says, looking at Peter. Turns out, this man is his long-lost father, Ego. Meanwhile, far away in a club in Contraxia, Yondu encounters Stakar, high-ranking Ravager. He greets him timidly with their salute, but Stakar just leaves at the sight of him, telling the owner of the club in the process that she just lost 99 Ravager fleets by serving Yondu. This rejection angers Yondu, and he confronts Stakar. He tells him that he's a Ravager same as they are, but Stakar reminds him that he broke the Ravager code by dealing in child. He is no longer a Ravager to them, even if he wears their uniform. Before leaving, Stakar tells him that he took to pleasure in exiling Yondu, but his actions broke everybody's heart. As this is happening, one of Yondu's men, Taserface, starts going on about how Yondu has gone soft because of Peter Quill. Kraglin and another lieutenant call him out on his statements, and right as they do, Ayesha, the High Priestess of the Sovereign, comes walking in and hires Yondu to fetch Peter Quill. Speaking of, with the help of Gamora's persuasion to take this chance to get to know his father, Peter goes to join Ego on his planet. As Rocket fixes up the ship, Gamora, Quill, and Drax head out with Mantis and Ego, but not before Rocket pisses off Quill again, resulting in a pretty harsh goodbye. In the ship, Mantis shows the folks her empathic abilities of being able to read people's emotions. She reveals that Quill actually has romantic feelings for Gamora, which both Gamora and Quill brush off. Aside from this though, she reveals that she actually has the ability to make people fall asleep, which is her purpose for Ego. Later that night, back at the ship, Yondu's men creep up all around them. In the distance, we hear Rocket nonchalantly playing music and humming along as he seemingly repairs the ship, but as the Ravagers approach, they all set off the cleverly laid out traps made by Rocket. Turns out, the sounds from the ship were just a tape playing on a loop, and Nebula is still bound inside with Groot. After Rocket destroys a lot of the Ravagers with his traps, he is eventually caught by Yondu, who almost shoots him with his arrow. With Rocket captured, Yondu tells them that they aren't going to give up Quill to the High Priestess, but will instead take the batteries that Rocket stole. This pushes Kraglin, his lieutenant, to speak up. All he says is that his decision doesn't feel right, because Quill has already betrayed him too many times. To his surprise, this sparks a mutiny from the side of Taserface. As the men start raising their guns against each other, Nebula shoots Yondu's fin, causing him to pass out cold. With that, back in Yondu's ship, all of Yondu's loyal men are thrown out and left to perish in space as the captain himself is incapacitated and bound, together with Rocket and Groot. The mutinous band of Ravagers, led by Taserface, revel in this victory, and almost murder Rocket and Yondu in cold blood after the former makes fun of his name. In the middle of all of that, Nebula speaks up and tells them that they need to sell Rocket and Yondu to get the bounty, and that she wants 10% of the cut for what she did for them, and considering the fact that she is more dangerous than any of them combined. She also asks for a ship, and Kraglin leads her to a vessel. With that, she sets out to seek revenge on her sister. Meanwhile, the rest of the Ravagers bully Groot. After being forced into a small costume and made to act like the Ravager mascot, Groot walks away defeated once the partying is done. He walks past the cell holding Yondu and Rocket, and the two instruct him to fetch a prototype fin from Yondu's drawer. After multiple failed attempts, however, Kraglin helps the little guy out. Kraglin apologizes to Yondu, tells him that the mutiny was the end of all of his friends, and that he is ready to serve his captain again. He didn't mean for a mutiny to happen after all. With that, he sets out and releases a section of the ship, and helps the two escape. With Rocket and Yondu free, all hell breaks loose inside the ship as they shoot everyone. Just as Kraglin releases a section of the ship, Yondu blows up the main ship, and they all head out to save Quill and the gang, but not before Taserface sends the coordinates of the ship to the Sovereign. Meanwhile, Ego brings them to his planet and shows him his creations. This is where Ego reveals that he is actually a Celestial, who began as a lonely being that terraformed the planet around himself to form what they see now, including the man that Quill's mother fell in love with. Ego tells Quill that he actually sent Yondu to fetch him from Earth, after the passing of Meredith, but he never actually delivered him. With the two now reunited, Ego then teaches Quill how to channel the light that can be found within him and the planet, to create things. Later that day, however, Mantis and Drax start to bond, and Mantis almost reveals something to Drax just before Gamora walks in on them. Gamora tries coaxing information from her, but to no avail. Gamora tries to tell Quill about this, but he brushes it off as her trying to take away his happiness from the moment. Gamora walks out and stays in a field, but as she sits it out, in the distance she sees a ship jump into view and realizes it's Nebula. She tries to shoot her, but ultimately crashes the ship, and it falls deep into a fissure. Gamora goes in and saves her, and the two fight, with Nebula almost finishing off Gamora, but letting go of her weapon anyway. After a tense exchange, the two try to find a way out of the caverns, but end up inside a massive cave filled with bones. As this is happening, Quill actually speaks to his father again, and Ego makes his big reveal. He makes Quill see his entire vision, and for a moment, Quill's eyes turn into a reflection of the cosmos. Ego reveals that his purpose involves planting seedlings into the planets he visited. These seedlings could terraform into extensions of himself, but only the power of two Celestials could activate it. Meanwhile, Mantis finally spills the beans to a sleeping Drax, and moments after, Gamora storms in and confronts her, after she's told him everything. As this is happening, Ego reveals that for years he has been hopping from one planet to another to make a baby that could carry his celestial genes, so that they could enact the expansion together. He did that for millions of years. That didn't measure up, until he came across Quill's mother. When he heard of a kid that could hold an Infinity Stone without getting harmed, that's when he knew that he succeeded, and set out to find him. After Yondu refused to surrender him, Quill was confused. He asked if he really did love his mother. That's when Ego reveals that he's the one that put the tumor in her brain. This angers Quill, and he goes on a rampage against Ego, but he stabs him and uses his body as a battery to activate the seedlings in all of the planets. Before he can succeed though, Yondu crashes into his palace and saves Quill. The terraforming in the other planets stops momentarily, and Yondu and the rest of the gang fly out of the palace and head straight down to the center of the planet to finish Ego once and for all, to stop his agenda of destroying the galaxy. As all this is happening, right outside, Kraglin stands guard and waits for the folks back on the ground. As he chills around, an entire Sovereign fleet jumps into view and heads straight down to the planet. He tries contacting the folks drilling themselves into the core of the planet, but the signal gets lost. When the signal does get through, it's too late. Ayesha and her gang of pompous Sovereign soldiers start shooting at them. They try evading, but the Sovereign ends up shooting their generator, rendering their lasers useless and knocking Gamora, Mantis, and Drax off the ship. With no lasers, Rocket comes up with a makeshift bomb using the priceless Sovereign batteries and a detonator before flying off towards the core with Quill. On the ground, Mantis can feel that Ego is awakening again. Although frightened, Drax convinces her that she could try to make him sleep. She succeeds, but is unsure how long she will be able to hold him down. Meanwhile, Quill and Rocket inspect the core, only to realize that the metal protection is far too thick for the bomb to work. They need someone small, and lucky for them, Groot is still baby-sized and can fit in the holes. Rocket tells Quill it's a horrible idea, but they have no choice. Quill leaves to protect the folks, and Rocket goes in to instruct Groot on what to do, or at least try to. Groot keeps getting it wrong, and thinks that he should press the button that makes it explode instantly. As Rocket tries to find tape to cover the button, Groot takes the bomb and runs away. Oops. With the ship in very poor shape, Nebula then offers to use her tech built-ins to serve as a makeshift generator for the ship. The Sovereign fleet surround them, and are shooting from all fronts. Yondu takes this offer and activates the lasers using Nebula's body, and ends up zapping every single one of their ships, much to Ayesha's anger and Nebula's pain. The ship still explodes, but all of them are able to escape. Unfortunately, Mantis gets hit on the head by a large rock and passes out, causing Ego to wake. The ground beneath them breaks as Ego starts attacking them. Gamora falls, but Nebula goes to save her, and Drax, using Quill's jetpack, is able to fly off to the surface to get to Kraglin, who is instructed by Yondu to lower the ship and have it ready in 5 minutes. This leaves Quill, Rocket, and Yondu fighting against the magical tentacles made by Ego. Gamora and Nebula, after getting to relative safety, hop on a rapidly rising rock formation to get to the surface, while Drax tries to carry an unconscious Mantis to the ship. As Quill is left to confront his father, Ego gets angry and starts to suffocate everyone. But before he can fully crush Yondu, Yondu tells Quill that he uses his heart to control the arrow, inspiring Quill to do the same and channeling the light of the planet to fight his own father. It works. Quill is angered and uses this to stop his dad, subsequently freeing everyone who was being crushed. As father and son battle it out, Drax is able to get Mantis to safety, and the rest of the gang break free, including Groot, who is right in front of Ego's core with the bomb. He does as he is told and flicks the switches, and almost presses the explosive button, but ends up pressing the correct one before running off. Rocket comes to pick him up, and tells Yondu they need to go immediately, before the bomb goes off. Yondu refuses, however, and that's when Rocket reveals that he only has one suit and rig. Yondu solemnly accepts this, and before they leave, Rocket and Groot welcome him into the Guardians of the Galaxy. Meanwhile, Celestial father and son still go at it against each other until the last few minutes. Rocket reaches the ship outside with only a minute to spare, and finds Nebula and Gamora already there. Gamora questions him about Quill, but he doesn't answer. She tries going after him, but Rocket ends up subduing her to protect her. Without telling everyone about what happened below the surface, Rocket instructs Kraglin to begin their launch. With just a few seconds left on the clock, Ego begs Quill to stop the bomb, saying that if he lets his existence end, Quill will be just a regular human, but that's something that he doesn't really have a problem with. The bomb explodes and sends a shockwave through the planet, destroying it from the inside. As the place crumbles around him, Yondu flies through and saves Quill, telling him that he was lucky that he was his boy, and apologizing for not being a good role model to him, before giving him the only spacesuit he has as they fly into space. When Quill is rescued, the rest of the gang hold a small funeral for Yondu. Quill says a few words, telling everyone that Yondu had always been the father he was looking for his whole life. As the service goes on, Nebula walks away, and Gamora follows her. Gamora tells her that just like her, she was only focused on surviving, and didn't really see how it was affecting Nebula. She tries inviting her into the Guardians, but Nebula is set on eliminating Thanos herself, to prevent the pain of many other little girls like the two of them. Before she leaves, however, Gamora gives her a hug. As Quill cremates Yondu's remains, Kraglin gives him a gift that Yondu had made for him, a zune that contains 300 songs that people on Earth were listening to nowadays. With that, Quill gives him Yondu's arrow that Rocket reassembled, and tells him that Yondu would have wanted Kraglin, his loyal lieutenant, to have it. As the crew settle down, beyond their ship, the Ravagers show up. Turns out, Rocket sent out word about what he did, and they all came, giving him the Ravager funeral he deserves, as the rest of the Guardians watch the skies alight with the colors of the Ravagers.